I'm Lee Hurt, one of the associate pastors, and we would like to welcome all of you to our worship this morning. We'd like to ask if you would please make a point of registering your attendance on the cards, and particularly if you are new or first time or snowbirds, we would like to get information from you so that we might follow up and get to know you a little bit better. I'd like to personally thank the choir and Ken and Bill for their work last Sunday. I think it was unbelievable. In fact, if we could do it every week, we'd have... A number of you were concerned about my lack of Christmas ties. And if you weren't here, I only have 2 Christmas ties because I'm retired, and I didn't think I needed more, and then something happened to me, and here I stand. Well, the congregation, first off, needs to be congratulated because for the first time in many, many years, we are entering the new year with a balanced budget. Your pledges are equal and ahead. It really is special. You don't have, those of us who are preachers, we only dream about those things happening. Well, at the church council, when I heard that news, I asked if I could get a bigger allowance to buy another Christmas tie. And it was turned down. But Steve Phillips, who is a friend of mine and was at the council, came up to me afterwards and he said, you know, I only have 2 Christmas ties too. Why don't we exchange? And so this is Steve's tie. My tie is in the back row. And it's the one with the gravy that's dripping off of it. So. We would like to...
Lee,
oh,
I've
no.
got 2 Christmas ties also.
You're in the loop. Hey, Steve, get his tie, will you? We'd like to make a special invitation for you to attend Christmas Eve tomorrow night at 4 o'clock and at 6:30. It will be a candlelight service at both services, and we hope that you'll make a special effort to attend. If you need anything from the church office, you're out of luck. We're basically taking this week off, and for those of us who are part-time, it really doesn't matter, but you know, the full-timers, it does make a difference. The rose, okay, I'm gonna get this right, there. The rose is for Laverne Erickson's 20th great-grandchild. Are you here? Would you tell me your great-grandchild's name so I don't have to pronounce it? Okay. Anyway, it's printed in the bulletin so I don't have to. The mission candle this morning is in memory. Okay, thank you. My goodness, okay, wonderful. The mission candle this morning, which I can see this week, one of them is in memory of Al Jarrett by his wife, Patsy, for Roberta Graham, who had a memorial service, and the flowers over here are from that memorial service, and she'll be loved and missed by her family. The candle is also for the 97th birthday of Virginia Mont, the 94th birthday to Margaret Kantz from the Mary Ruth Circle, and to wish the 52nd wedding anniversary to Oscar and Minnie Johnson. Are any of those people here that would like to be? No? Okay, well, if you know them, give them their best, okay? I think that's all I'm supposed to say. And if not, oh my gosh, I am chosen. I am blessed. I am loved. And now would you turn to someone and repeat these words to them? You are chosen. You are blessed. And you are loved. Is that it? Okay, now would you please stand and greet one another in passing of the peace of Christ. God bless you all.
I invite you to begin heading back towards your seats. And one last thing we wanted you to notice are these rails. Thank you to our trustees for making our lives up here a lot safer and for making it possible for people to get up here who have been reluctant to come and help us. Now I invite you to quieten your hearts for worship.
And now, if you're comfortable doing so, let's stand and join our voices with those of the angels as we sing Gloria in excelsis Deo, angels from the realms of glory.
Please remain standing if you're comfortable and plan to join me in the opening prayer. God of darkness and light, we gather to remind ourselves that your Son, Jesus the Christ, is none other than the light of the world. We eagerly anticipate celebrating the coming into this dark world. Prepare our hearts that we may receive the gift of your presence, Him, and be ever changed. We pray in the name of Emmanuel, God with us. Amen. Please be seated.
One of the ways we celebrate and wait in this season is the lighting of the Advent candle. And today, to do that for us, we have the Hammonds, Terry and Marion, as they light the first 3 candles that we've already lit and then add to it the 4th candle. We're almost there.
Today, we light 4 candles. The first candle reminds us of our hope in knowing Jesus as our wonderful counselor. The second candle of the love God has had for us as his children, in spite of our flaws. The third candle reminds us of the joy we experience in serving a God who is almighty, all-knowing, and always present. We light the 4th candle to remind us that Jesus came to earth as the Prince of Peace in a world filled with conflict and discord. We pray for harmony and unity as we work towards claiming the promise of peace on earth.
The scripture this morning comes from 2 Kings, the 5th chapter, verses 1 through 14. Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Aram, was a great man and in high favor with his master. Because of him, the Lord had given victory to Aram. The man, though a mighty warrior, suffered from leprosy. Now the Arameans on one of their raids had taken a young girl captive from the land of Israel, and she served as Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "If only my Lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." So Naaman went in and told his Lord just what the girl from Israel had said. And the king of Aram said, "Go then, and I'll send along a letter to the king of Israel." He went, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of garments. He brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, "When this letter reaches you, know that it has been sent to you, my servant Naaman, that you may cure him of his leprosy." When the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, "Am I God to try to cure this death or life? That this man has sent the word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? Just look and see how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me." But when Elisha, the man of God, heard the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent a message to the king. "Why have you torn your clothes? Let him come to me, that he may learn that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman came with his horses and his chariots, and halted at the entrance of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, "Go, wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh will be restored, and you shall be clean." But Naaman became angry and went away, saying, "I thought that for me he would surely come out and stand and call to the name of the Lord of God, and would wave his hand over the spot and cure the leprosy. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean?" He turned and went away in a rage. But his servants approached and said to him, "Father, if the prophet had commanded you to do something difficult, would you have not done it? How much more when all he said to you was, 'Wash and clean'?" So he went down and immersed himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God. This flesh was restored like the flesh of a young boy, and he was clean. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
So beautiful. The music of this season just blesses and blesses, doesn't it? Would you pray with me? Now let the words of my mouth be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. Welcome to this ongoing series, God is Closer Than You Think. We'll finish this up on Christmas Eve, which is a wonderful time to think about how close God draws to us in the Christmas event. As we begin today, I brought some visual aids, and I'm going to have you participate with me. And I have all kinds of containers here beside me. And so I'm going to hold them up, and you yell out what they are and what do they normally contain. It's a gift bag, and it would have gifts in it. It's a pitcher, it would have water jug, that kind of stuff would be in it. Kind of the same thing. Yeah, latte, yeah. And this one. It's different things people are saying. It's a briefcase, it's a computer case. So what would it normally be inside? Work. Work is a good way to put it. Work would be inside papers or a computer. Well, those are all inanimate object containers. But I want to call your attention to a whole bunch of other containers that are in the room. And not all of them are inanimate. And so to do this, I'm going to invite Ken to stand up. Ken, I did this to Bill yesterday. I told him not to tell you. What kind of container is this? Yeah? What did you say? Music, maybe? Yeah, well, we think of music because all that beautiful music has just been drawn out of these people. And that would be true, but there is so much more. Ken is not just a music container, he is a God container. He was created by God to be filled with God's goodness and grace and possibility and hope, so that that can be poured out into the world, in part through music. You can sit down now. Thank you, Ken. I caught them both by surprise. I was seeing if they were paying attention. But it's not just music directors. It's not just accompanists. It's not just pastors who are God containers. Each one of you is a God container. Each one of you was created in the image of God with the purpose that you would be filled with the goodness and grace and possibility and hope of God, in order that, not for your benefit, but for the benefit of the world, in order that those things might be poured out into the world so that people know what God looks like. You're a God container. Now, there's some extraordinary God containers in this world who really demonstrate in a special way the love of God to the world. One of them was a priest named Father Damien. And Father Damien was an extraordinary man. He made a choice to move to the island of Molokai in the Hawaiian island chain. And the island of Molokai is a leper colony, was a leper colony in the days in which he moved there. It was a one-way destination. People who moved there did not move out. They left their families, they left their communities behind, and they went there because in those days, leprosy was considered to be incurable and very transmissible. And so people who contracted the disease would separate themselves from their loved ones in order that they would not spread the disease to them. And they would go and live there, and they would never come back, and they would never see their families again. It was an extraordinary decision to go and minister there. And he lived for years in their midst. He learned their language. He bandaged their wounds. He embraced their ravaged bodies. He organized schools for them and bands and choirs and helped to build homes for their shelter because they lived in very primitive conditions. And in the time he was there, he built 2,000 coffins by hand so that they could be properly buried, because that was something that had not been happening until he came there. Now, if you and I decided to do something like that, I think we would do it in a certain way, wouldn't we? We would take lots of masks and lots of gloves, and we would stay apart, in a home apart, so that we would not contract that disease. And so there would always be a distance between us and the people we were serving. But that is not how Father Damien decided to do this mission. He went to live there. And he ate from the same bowl as the people he was serving, and he shared his pipe with them. And he wasn't always super careful about washing his hands after he touched one of them or bandaged their sores. And they noticed that immediately, and they loved him for it. And they felt the love that he had for them. And the love that he had for them came to represent for them the love that God had for them. And they got it. They got it, how God loved them. And then one day, Father Damien stood up and he began his weekly sermon by saying, "We lepers, we lepers." He had become one of them. He was no longer just someone from the outside who came to help. He was in their skin now. He was living as they lived. He was facing the very same death that they faced. They were in it together. What an extraordinary God container. And through him, those people learned the fullness of the love of God. And there's striking resemblances between that story of Father Damien going to become one of the lepers and God coming to be one of us. Have you ever thought of that? One day God came to earth in a little baby named Jesus. And in that act, God was kind of saying, we lepers. He was saying, we're in this together. God wasn't just offering help to us. He was coming to be one of us so that we really are in it together. The story of Jesus' birth is such a passionate love story. It's the story of a God who was stooped to almost any level to show his love, would humble himself completely to show his love. And the story is so shocking that some people then and some people now don't really recognize this as an act of God. They don't recognize this baby as the face of God. They think God should be more godlike, that there should be thunder and lightning when God speaks. God shouldn't be so humble. He should be more regal. But God came to us very humbly as a helpless baby lying in a manger. And he grew up as a humble carpenter's son. And then as he lived and died and was resurrected, he ascended into heaven, but he didn't leave us alone when that happened. You know, God came to live among us. It's not that God vacated the premises at the end of that story. He is still with us in his body, the church. Jesus is present here, and his Spirit abides in each one of those who follow him. His Spirit is in you. His Spirit is in me. His Spirit is in every other God container who makes up the body of Christ. He's closer than you think. Now, throughout this series, we've looked at various ways of experiencing God and the closeness of God. And we began by seeing how God offers relationship to each one of God's children. Throughout the whole Bible, that's the story. God stretching out, offering a connection, offering a relationship. And it's also the story of God's children often just not bothering to lift a finger to make the connection. And it's often a story of God's children first lifting a finger and then walking away. And we've seen how this present moment right now is the only moment that we will ever have to connect with God. Because yesterday is gone. It's a canceled check. And tomorrow's a promissory note that never really gets paid. It never really comes. And this moment right now is as full of God as any moment that we will ever have in our lives. This is the moment to connect with God. And last week, for those of you who made it to the second service, we talked about how we can make our minds into the dwelling place of God. We can train our minds to be those kinds of places where God's presence is real and where we can recognize God's voice and where we can respond to those things that God asks us to do. And today we look at how God is present and active through ordinary folks like you and like me. How God blesses the world through ordinary folks like you and me. I don't know why God does that, but you see it all the way through the Bible. Mary was a very ordinary person. Joseph was an ordinary person, and through them God blessed the world. Even back in the Old Testament times, in the story of Naaman, we see these very ordinary people becoming messengers of God, people through whom God's healing is given. Naaman was a big deal. He was a commander of the Aramean army. And he had just returned, if you look back a little bit from this story, he had just come back triumphant from the land of Israel. He had whacked the land of Israel. He had killed their king. He had devastated their country. And he came back triumphant, being honored by everyone. He was an incredibly big deal, a powerful commander. And really, he was at the high point of his life, except for those little spots that somewhere he had contracted, those spots that would mean that he was going to be debilitated and disfigured and die because he had leprosy. Until God intervened in this crazy way, through a crazy avenue, through a slave girl. This slave girl had been taken captive by this army that Naaman led. She'd lost her family, she'd lost everything. Everything. Her life had been just devastated, and she had become a slave to Naaman's wife. And she was the lowest of the low. I mean, why would a commander like Naaman listen to a low person like that? What do slave girls know? And yet, she was the one who told his wife, who then told him that there was a healer in the land of Israel. Now, that probably wasn't just real good news, because he wouldn't be real welcome in the land of Israel at that moment in time. And then there's this issue of, well, who listens to a slave girl, especially if you're a big deal? But he was desperate. And desperation sometimes pushes you to do things you wouldn't do, so he listened. And he went to his king, and his king sent a letter to the king of Israel, which caused great consternation because the king of Israel had no idea what they were talking about. He had no idea about this healer. Until Elisha sent a message and said, "Send him to me." Elisha was the one that the girl had been talking about. So Naaman goes to Elisha's house. And he's clearly expecting a big deal. He is a big deal. He pulls up with his entourage, and he's thinking that the holy man is going to come out and do a big ceremony, a big Benny Hinn thing, and lay hands on him, and he's going to be healed. Does not happen. He's a big deal, but Elisha acts like he's not. He sends somebody out to just say, okay, go wash in the Jordan 7 times, you'll be healed. And that is not what Naaman wanted to happen. He's like, are you kidding me? We've got better rivers than the Jordan, and the Jordan isn't a very good river. It's kind of muddy, and it's not very big a lot of the year. It's, and he just raged off. He was offended. And here's what was happening there. God had sent a message to Naaman through that slave girl in the first place. And now God was sending a message through this person from Elisha's household. But he didn't want to listen to it because it was such a lowly person. And finally, there's this one final messenger from God, and it's another servant. And the servant says to Elijah, if God had asked you to do something great, you would have done it. So why not obey him when he asks you to do something small? All you have to do is go wash. And that lowly servant's words brought Naaman to the banks of the Jordan. And when I think about that scene, I think about all of his soldiers standing around him, and I think about him standing there going, this is the dumbest thing I ever heard of. This is not going to work. This is humiliating. I don't want to get in this dirty river. You know what I'm saying? I just see it. And finally, just out of desperation, he gets into that river. And then it's this in and out thing, down and up and down and up and down and up. 7 times he has to go down and up. And somewhere in that sequence of 7 immersions in the Jordan, he meets the God of healing and hope. In spite of himself, he comes up out of that water clean as a whistle, healed of every trace of leprosy. What an incredible miracle. And later he said, now I know there's no God but this God, the God of Israel. And not only has he been healed, but he's been converted. He now knows who's really in charge. But he was led to that healing through very ordinary people. God didn't send the message through the king or through another commander. God sent the message through ordinary people. I don't know why God does that. It'd be so much easier if God used big deal people for messages, But God often does. And the truth is, I miss so many messages that God sends to me through ordinary people because I'm looking for God in big stuff. I go away on silent retreats and I fast and I pray and I read my Bible and I'm looking for this big deal thing. And then God shows up in the ordinary people that walk up and down the hall and pop in and talk to me for a moment. And sometimes I just miss it. James Harnish tells a story about a woman, he's a pastor, a woman who came to his church who clearly was not like the other people in this church. He was preaching one day, and he looked up and he saw her come in. And so she was really quite late because the sermon had already begun. And he could tell she was nervous. She was itchy. She had on the sweatpants and sneakers, and she was not dressed for church, and she was twitchy, and she just looked totally uncomfortable. And he noticed her, and then by the time he got back there, she was gone. And the next week, she was there again, a little more on time. And then she was there again. And every time you just noticed, she was just like a sore thumb. She just stood out in that congregation. She had some kind of neuromuscular disease that caused her to twitch and to act in unusual ways. And after she'd come for a while, she came in to see the pastor, and he welcomed her into his office, and she sat down, and she was pretty hostile at first. She says, I don't understand. I don't understand why somebody has to die to save me so that I can be saved. She said, I don't get it. I don't get that at all. And the pastor, fortunately, didn't try to argue her out of that. He just said, Christians for 2,000 years have struggled with that, have struggled with what it means to say that Jesus died to save us. How about you work on that with us? Because a lot of us are working on that too. And he invited her into a disciple Bible study. And those people in that class just embraced her. She kind of twitched and she acted weird and she didn't dress like everybody else. And sometimes she said things that seemed out of place, but they just made room and they just welcomed her. And she would come every week and they just drew her into their lives and they cared for her and they made it clear that they loved her in spite of all of that. And within a period of time, not too long, she woke up one morning and realized that that neuromuscular disease was gone. She had been completely healed. And she would explain it this way later. She would say, where did I find my notes here? I think I've figured out what happened. In this church, I received a transfusion of love. A transfusion of love. Her healing came to her through those ordinary people. It could be you. It could be me. And there was a sense in which she had washed in the Jordan. In spite of herself, in spite of her hostility and her aggression, she had been made whole through the ministry of ordinary people. And that church became for her, and that class became for her, a place of healing and wholeness in God, a place of Beth-El, the place where God is present. God was so much closer than she thought. So one side of this equation, if we put yourself in Naaman's shoes, one side of this equation of God's work in the world is that we really need to be looking for God's messages in other ordinary people. And maybe even in people who kind of catch our attention and who are unusual to us. Because God may be sending us messages. And when something really catches our attention, we should say to God, is that you speaking through this person? That's one side of the equation. And the other side of the equation is that we need to be willing to allow God to use us as God containers. God can use us to speak into the lives of others, to bring healing and hope. We need to be willing to let God give messages through us. Frank Laubach says we can do this through something he calls the CIHU prayer. Can I help you? CIHU. Can I help you? Can I help you find God? And he says we should pray that prayer all the time, like when we're in the doctor's office. Instead of sitting there looking around saying, well, I wonder if there's any interesting people here that it might be fun to connect with for me. You look around and you say about the people inside your head, you say to God, can I help you? You're just looking at the people in the room with you. Can I help you? Can I help you find God? Is there something I can do that will allow God to shine through me? One person who did that is actually a friend of mine. She heard about all of this and she began to think about it and pray about it, and she prayed this prayer: God, if you want me to touch somebody with the good news of Jesus, show me who they are and make me willing to do it. Now, don't pray that unless you mean it. Because not long after she prayed that prayer, she went to her massage therapist. I'm going to call this woman Sarah. That's not exactly her name, but it's close. She went to her massage therapist, and the woman was just beside herself. She had never seen her so angry. And it turned out that the previous client, who had been going there for a long time too, and who had been very clear that she was a good Christian church-going woman and had kind of many times banged on that with that massage therapist, had gone in this day and read her the riot act about the massage therapist, the riot act about living with a man who was not her husband. She told her it was sinful and that if she wanted to go to heaven, she needed to stop doing that. And she just infuriated the massage therapist. So when my friend went in there, she just took it in the face, and she listened to all this, and she was just like, oh my gosh, what should I do? I mean, clearly she couldn't argue about it. I mean, so she just decided that she would just hear it as a friend, and that she would make it a point to become a friend to this massage therapist. So she began to be careful to remember what they talked about, and the next time she would ask about the things they talked about. And she asked about the massage therapist's family, and she would say, well, how are your kids doing, and what happened with the test, and things like that. And over time, they really became friends. And after they became friends, Sarah and I offered an alpha class at one of the churches that I was leading at that time. It's an introduction to faith. And because she had established this relationship over a period of time, she was able to say to this massage therapist, why don't you come to this alpha course? Just come try it one time. We're going to have dinner. It's not church. It's a dinner and a little movie, and you'll learn some stuff, and we have conversation. And that massage therapist was able to come because it wasn't church. It was dinner and a little movie and some conversation. And at the end of that course, that massage therapist gave her life to Christ and became a follower of Jesus. Because Sarah prayed, can I help you? She prayed that prayer. She made herself available to be one whose grace and goodness that God had filled her with could pour out on someone who had been wounded by someone in the church. You know, you'll be amazed if you begin praying this prayer, can I help you? Because you're a God container. You really are. Would you say that to yourself? I'm a God container. And would you turn to someone near you and say to that person, you are a God container. You're a God container. And that's the truth. You were made in the image of God to be a bearer of his likeness. You are intended to make his presence real in the world, to be filled with his goodness and grace and allow that to pour that out into the world. That's who you are. That's what you were meant to do. And by that, I say God is closer than you think. Thanks be to God. Our song of response is